The luxurious evening gala was in full swing, a gathering of the nation's elite under shimmering chandeliers. Amid the glamour, Melania Trump moved gracefully, her calm demeanor embodying poise. Suddenly, an unexpected voice sliced through the air, sharp and disrespectful. The crowd fell silent as a man, emboldened by the crowd, confronted Melania with harsh words. Gasps echoed as all eyes turned to the First Lady. But what happened next wasn't what anyone expected. It became a moment that would redefine courage, dignity, and justice in the public eye. The ballroom shimmered with elegance as dignitaries and philanthropists from across the nation gathered for the annual charity gala hosted by Melania Trump. The evening was a celebration of unity, hope, and compassion, or so it seemed. Beneath the glitz and glamour, a storm was brewing. As Melania stepped onto the stage, the crowd hushed. Her calm demeanor and poised smile radiated an air of grace. She began her speech, addressing the importance of standing together as a nation. "Tonight, we gather not just to celebrate generosity," she said, her voice steady and clear, "but to remind ourselves of the power of kindness in the face of division." The room echoed with polite applause, but a sudden voice cut through the decorum like a blade. "Kindness?" The word dripped with sarcasm and disdain. All heads turned toward a man standing near the back, his expression hard, his fists clenched. He was in his mid-40s, dressed plainly compared to the lavish attire of the other guests. His name was Marcus, a factory worker from a struggling Midwest town, and his eyes burned with anger. "What do you know about kindness?" Marcus continued, stepping forward. His voice grew louder, filled with years of pent-up frustration. "While you stand here in designer gowns and jewels, people like me are drowning. Jobs gone, families broken, and you dare speak of compassion?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Security guards began to move, but Melania raised her hand, signaling them to stop. "Let him speak," she said calmly, though her eyes carried the weight of the moment. Marcus hesitated, surprised by her response, but his anger surged again. "Do you even know what real struggle looks like? Or are we just statistics to you?" The crowd watched in stunned silence, the tension in the room palpable. For a brief moment, Melania's composed exterior faltered, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her face. But then, she stepped forward, meeting Marcus's fiery gaze with quiet strength. "I may not know your pain," she said softly, her words cutting through the silence. "But I am here tonight to listen." Her response was unexpected, disarming even. The room, holding its collective breath, waited for what would happen next. The diner fell into an eerie silence as the confrontation escalated. Melania Trump stood her ground, her elegant composure unwavering despite the aggressor's loud, slurred accusations. The man's voice echoed through the small diner, his words dripping with disrespect. "You think you're better than us?" he sneered, his tone laced with bitterness. "Coming in here like royalty. This isn't some fancy New York gala, lady." Melania glanced around the room, her piercing gaze meeting the eyes of several diners who had stopped mid-bite to watch the unfolding scene. She could see their discomfort, their curiosity, and in some cases, their silent approval of the man's brash behavior. But Melania wasn't one to back down, not when principles were at stake. "I am here as any other customer," she replied firmly, her voice calm yet commanding. "Your frustration is not with me, but with something deeper within yourself." Her words seemed to strike a nerve. The man's face reddened further, and he slammed his fist on the counter, causing the coffee mugs to rattle. "Don't lecture me, lady. People like you don't know the first thing about struggle." The tension in the room was suffocating. A young waitress, barely out of her teens, stood frozen in the corner, clutching her notepad. Her wide eyes darted between Melania and the man, unsure whether to intervene or flee. A heavy-set truck driver seated near the window muttered under his breath, "Someone needs to step in before this gets worse." But no one moved. Melania took a step forward, closing the distance between herself and the aggressor. Despite his larger frame and aggressive demeanor, she stood tall, exuding an aura of quiet strength. "I know struggle," she said, her tone softening but losing none of its conviction. "And I know kindness. This is not how we solve our problems." The man faltered for a moment, his expression shifting as if her words had touched a hidden part of him. But before he could respond, the door to the diner swung open with a loud creak. A uniformed police officer stepped inside, his presence instantly commanding attention. The chatter that had started to pick up again ceased as all eyes turned toward him. The officer, a middle-aged man with a stern yet approachable demeanor, scanned the room before focusing on the pair at the center of the tension. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice steady but firm. Melania turned to the officer, offering him a polite nod. "No problem, officer. Just a misunderstanding." The aggressor, however, seemed less inclined to let things slide. "Misunderstanding? This woman thinks she can just waltz in here and—" "That's enough," the officer interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. He gestured for the man to step aside. "Let's talk outside." The man hesitated, his bravado fading under the officer's authoritative gaze. Grumbling, he allowed himself to be led out of the diner, leaving the room in a stunned silence. Melania turned back to the other patrons, her expression unreadable. "I apologize for the disruption," she said, her voice steady. "Please, enjoy your meals." She sat back down at her table, resuming her coffee as though nothing had happened. But the atmosphere in the diner had shifted. Whispers filled the air as people began to speculate about the encounter and the woman who had handled it with such grace. In the corner, the young waitress finally found her courage and approached Melania's table, her voice trembling. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say, thank you for standing up to him." Melania offered a small smile. "Kindness is the greatest strength," she said simply, her words resonating deeply with the girl. Outside, the officer and the aggressor exchanged a few more heated words before the man finally stormed off. As the officer re-entered the diner, he gave Melania a respectful nod. "Thank you for keeping calm, ma'am," he said. "Not everyone would have handled it so gracefully." Melania inclined her head, her eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and resolve. "Sometimes, calm is the loudest voice in the room," she replied. The incident might have ended, but its impact lingered. Little did Melania know, this encounter was the beginning of something far greater, a story that would ripple far beyond the walls of that small-town diner. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the small town, Melania Trump decided it was time to leave the diner. The young waitress had regained her composure, inspired by Melania's grace and reassurance. Melania left a generous tip, accompanied by a handwritten note that read, "Courage shines brightest in the darkest moments." Walking out of the diner, Melania didn't notice the curious eyes of the townsfolk following her every move. Word had spread quickly about the confrontation, and many were eager to see how the former First Lady carried herself amidst adversity. She made her way to her parked car, her steps measured and purposeful. Just as she reached her vehicle, a voice called out behind her. "Excuse me, ma'am." She turned to find the same police officer from earlier approaching her, his expression one of both respect and concern. "I wanted to thank you for handling that situation so calmly," he began, tipping his hat slightly. "But I have to warn you, the man you confronted, Roy Miller, has a reputation around here. He's not the kind to let things go easily." Melania's expression remained calm. "Thank you for your concern, officer," she replied. "But I've faced far worse than a man like him." The officer hesitated, clearly torn. "Well, if you're staying in town, just be cautious. He's not someone to underestimate." Melania gave him a polite nod and got into her car. As she drove away, her thoughts lingered on the interaction. It wasn't fear that gripped her, it was curiosity. Why would a man harbor such hostility towards someone he didn't even know? Was there more to his anger than met the eye? Later that evening, as she settled into her room at the quaint bed and breakfast she'd chosen for the night, Melania received a call from an old friend. It was Ivanka, who immediately picked up on the tension in her voice. "Mom, is everything okay?" Ivanka asked, her tone laced with concern. "Yes, dear," Melania reassured her. "But I may have stumbled into a situation that needs addressing." Ivanka chuckled lightly. "You've always been drawn to helping others, even in the most unexpected places. Just be careful, okay?" After hanging up, Melania decided to dig deeper into Roy Miller. She discovered through a quick search that his life had been marred by a series of hardships, bankruptcy, a broken family, and a community that had largely turned its back on him. His anger, she realized, was likely a mask for his pain. Determined to uncover the truth, Melania resolved to visit someone who knew Roy personally. The next morning, she made her way to a modest farmhouse on the outskirts of town, where she was greeted by an elderly woman who introduced herself as Martha, Roy's mother. "I'm not surprised he caused trouble," Martha said with a sigh when Melania explained the incident at the diner. "He's been lost for years now, ever since." Her voice trailed off, and her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Melania placed a comforting hand on the older woman's shoulder. "Sometimes, people just need someone to listen," she said softly. Martha looked up, a glimmer of hope in her weary eyes. "Do you really think he can change?" Melania's voice was firm but gentle. "I believe everyone is capable of change. It's just a matter of finding the right reason to." As Melania left the farmhouse, her resolve solidified. She wasn't just going to let Roy's anger fester unchecked. She was going to show him that kindness could break through even the toughest barriers. This was no longer just a chance encounter, it was a mission. The quiet drive back to her estate left Melania deep in thought. Martha's words replayed in her mind like a haunting melody, "They tore my family apart." She couldn't ignore the desperation and pain in her voice. Determined to uncover the truth, Melania decided she couldn't let this injustice go unchallenged. The next morning, Melania called for her assistant, Clara, to dig into Caleb Miller's case. "Clara, I need you to look into an old case involving Martha Miller's son, Caleb. He was accused of a serious crime a few years ago. Start with the court records and media coverage from that time." Clara nodded, sensing the urgency in Melania's tone. "Right away, Mrs. Trump." As Clara worked diligently, Melania found herself pacing the room, her mind racing with questions. Why would a small-town boy with no history of trouble suddenly commit a heinous crime? The pieces didn't fit. She needed to hear Caleb's side of the story. Later that afternoon, Clara returned with a file in hand, her expression serious. "Ma'am, I found something strange. Caleb was accused of assaulting a prominent local businessman, but the evidence was circumstantial at best. No witnesses, no concrete proof, just the word of the businessman and his influence in the community." Melania's eyes narrowed. "And Caleb? What happened to him?" "He took a plea deal," Clara replied. "The alternative was facing decades in prison. But there's more. This businessman has a history of accusations, all of which seem to disappear before they reach court." Melania's chest tightened. "Corruption," she whispered. "This can't be a coincidence." The next step was clear. Melania needed to confront the man responsible. But first, She had to find someone who could provide more details about the case, someone who knew the truth about Caleb Miller. The only question was, who could she trust in a town where power seemed to outweigh justice? Melania Trump sat in her hotel suite, her mind racing as she pieced together the fragments of information she had gathered. The USB drive she received earlier contained more than just vague threats. It held blueprints of an elaborate scheme involving influential figures, each playing a key role in what appeared to be a calculated attack on the reputation of her husband, Donald Trump. But what alarmed her most was the potential for public harm, a false flag operation designed to sow chaos. The weight of the discovery made her hesitate. Should she call Donald? The risk was high, the conspiracy seemed to extend into trusted circles. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. "Room service," a voice called. Melania frowned. She hadn't ordered anything. Her instincts kicked in. Carefully, she moved to the side of the door, her hand clutching the pepper spray she always carried. "Leave it at the door," she said firmly. The cart was pushed in by a young attendant, who glanced at her nervously and whispered, "Ma'am, check the breadbasket." Without waiting for her reaction, he hurried out of the room. Melania quickly searched the basket and found a folded note hidden among the rolls. It read, "They're watching you. Trust no one. Leave the hotel at 3 a.m. sharp. Wear a disguise." Her pulse quickened. Was this another trap, or did she have an ally? Her gut told her it was worth the risk. Later that night, as the city slept, Melania slipped out of the hotel disguised in a trench coat and wide-brimmed hat. She followed the instructions on the note and found herself in a deserted underground parking garage. The echo of her footsteps was deafening. Suddenly, a car's headlights flashed, momentarily blinding her. A man stepped out. "You're braver than I thought," he said. "But bravery alone won't save you. Who are you, and what do you want?" Melania demanded. The man smirked. "I'm here to make sure you know the stakes. This is bigger than just your family. The people pulling the strings won't hesitate to destroy anyone in their way." He handed her a dossier. "Read this. If you still think you can handle it, meet me tomorrow at Pier 21. Before she could ask another question, the man vanished into the shadows. Melania clutched the dossier tightly, her mind a storm of questions and fears. For the first time in years, she felt like the weight of the world was squarely on her shoulders. As she returned to the hotel unnoticed, she opened the dossier and gasped. The faces and names listed were not just strangers, they were people she and Donald had trusted for years. This wasn't just a conspiracy, it was personal. As the investigation into the anonymous threats escalated, Melania found herself torn between her public duties and the growing fear for her family's safety. The media had caught wind of the situation, and speculative headlines about the Trumps' predicament dominated the news cycles. Paparazzi camped outside their residences, amplifying the tension within the family. Donald, pacing in his office, was visibly frustrated. "This isn't just about us, Melania. This is an attack on our integrity. Whoever's behind this wants to tarnish our legacy." His words were resolute, but his eyes betrayed a hint of worry. Meanwhile, Melania decided to take matters into her own hands. She contacted an old confidant, a retired private investigator named Jack Reeves, renowned for his discreet and effective methods. Jack had been instrumental during Donald's presidency in handling sensitive matters. They met in a nondescript cafe on the outskirts of the city. Jack, a seasoned professional with salt and pepper hair and a sharp gaze, listened intently as Melania recounted the events. Anonymous letters, cryptic threats, and now the media frenzy. "It's a calculated move," Jack deduced. "What do you need from me?" Melania asked, her voice firm but laced with concern. I'll need access to everything, letters, footage, anything you've got. And I'll start where most criminals slip up, the delivery method. These letters didn't just appear. Someone delivered them, Jack explained. While Jack began his investigation, Barron struggled with the newfound scrutiny. At school, whispers followed him in the hallways, and his friends' curious glances were hard to ignore. Yet, he maintained his composure, drawing strength from his mother's resilience. Jack's initial findings pointed to a crucial clue. A surveillance camera near one of the drop-off points had captured a shadowy figure. Though the footage was grainy, the person's distinct gait and the bag they carried offered a lead. Back at the penthouse, the family gathered around Jack's laptop as he played the footage. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the laptop's fan. As the figure appeared on the screen, Melania's expression hardened. "I've seen that walk before," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Donald leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Melania hesitated before replying, "I think I know who this might be." Her words hung in the air, adding another layer of intrigue to an already tangled mystery. The private investigator, Mr. Grayson, leaned back in his chair, his steely eyes scanning the dimly lit room where he had set up his investigation base. A faint hum from his laptop filled the air as new pieces of evidence trickled in. Melania Trump had hired him with one directive: uncover the truth and ensure the safety of her family. On the screen, blurry surveillance footage played on a loop. The shadowy figure, who had dropped the envelope outside the Trump penthouse, appeared to be a middle-aged man, wearing a cap and a heavy coat. Grayson paused the video and zoomed in on the figure's face, but the shadows obscured any clear details. The coat's logo, however, caught his attention. It was faint but recognizable, a small emblem from a local courier service. Meanwhile, Melania sat in the corner of the room, her posture tense yet composed. "What do we know about this courier service?" she asked, her voice cutting through the silence. Grayson looked up, his expression grim. "It's small, mostly used for local deliveries. But the logo on the jacket suggests it's legitimate. We need to dig deeper to find out if this person is connected to anything larger." Donald Trump, who had entered the room quietly, placed a hand on Melania's shoulder. "Do what you need to do, Grayson. No expense spared," he said firmly. As the investigation deepened, Grayson discovered that the courier service had no records of a delivery to the Trump residence. The man in the footage was not a registered employee. This revelation sent a chill down Melania's spine. Later that evening, a breakthrough came. Grayson traced the figure to a dilapidated apartment building on the outskirts of the city. Surveillance from nearby cameras revealed the man entering and leaving the building several times, always at odd hours. "This is our lead," Grayson declared. But before they could act, an unexpected call came to Melania's private phone. The voice on the other end was deep, distorted. "If you value your family's safety, stop digging. Some truths are best left buried." The line went dead. Melania's face hardened. "We're not stopping," she said resolutely. "Not now, not ever." Donald nodded, his gaze meeting hers. For the first time in years, their resolve felt united. Grayson stood up, his determination matching theirs. "Then let's move fast. Before they move first." The hunt for the truth was no longer just an investigation, it was a race against time. The early hours of dawn painted the city in soft orange hues as Melania and Donald, accompanied by their private investigator, Samuel, prepared for the next step. The address tied to the mysterious courier was their only lead, and every moment felt like a race against time. Inside the investigator's car, tension filled the air. Melania stared out the window, her mind replaying the menacing voice from the call. "Donald, what if we're too late?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "We won't be," Donald replied firmly, placing a hand over hers. His determination radiated as he turned to Samuel. "You're sure this is the place?" Samuel nodded, pulling up outside the shabby apartment complex. The building loomed before them, its cracked walls and flickering hallway lights giving it an eerie feel. "The surveillance footage and delivery logs lead here. But we need to be cautious," Samuel advised, adjusting his jacket to reveal the concealed recording device clipped to his shirt. The plan was simple yet risky. Samuel would go in posing as a curious neighbor looking for someone while Donald and Melania waited in the car, ready to call for help if needed. As Samuel entered the building, Melania's heart raced. She clutched her phone tightly, her finger hovering over the call button. "I hate this waiting," she murmured. Minutes felt like hours. Suddenly, Samuel's voice crackled through the hidden communicator in Donald's ear. "I found him," Samuel whispered. "The guy matches the description, and he's definitely nervous. I'm pretending to be lost to buy time." Back in the car, Melania and Donald exchanged a glance filled with anticipation and unease. "What now?" Melania asked. Donald leaned forward, his eyes focused on the building. "We wait for Samuel's signal. And then, we get some answers." Inside the apartment, Samuel continued his act, noting every detail. The suspect had a cluttered desk filled with notes and maps, and in one corner, a courier bag similar to the one seen in the footage. Samuel's instincts screamed that he was in the right place. But the tension was palpable, one wrong move, and the suspect might bolt. Samuel's voice came through again, this time urgent. "He's getting suspicious. I think he's onto me. Be ready for anything." Donald's jaw tightened as he reached for his phone. "If he tries to run, we'll be here to stop him," he said. Melania nodded, her fear now transformed into steely resolve. The trap was set, but the outcome remained uncertain. Every second felt like the calm before a storm, one that could either reveal the truth or plunge them further into danger. The courtroom was tense. The air was thick with anticipation as Melania Trump entered, her presence commanding attention. Reporters filled the gallery, their pens poised, ready to capture every word. This wasn't just any trial, it was a battle of values, justice, and dignity. The defendant, a man whose actions had shaken the nation, sat stone-faced, avoiding eye contact. His legal team whispered frantically, sensing the gravity of the moment. On the other side, Melania's team exuded quiet confidence. Their evidence was airtight, their resolve unshakable. Melania took the stand, her calm demeanor masking the storm within. "No one, regardless of power or position, has the right to disrespect another," she said, her voice steady but powerful. "This case is not just about me, it's about every woman who has felt powerless." The prosecutor presented video evidence, showing the man's aggressive behavior. The room gasped audibly. Melania's testimony, combined with irrefutable proof, began to sway the jury. Outside, supporters gathered in the thousands, chanting slogans for justice. American flags waved in the breeze, and posters with phrases like "Stand with Melania" and "Respect women everywhere" dotted the crowd. As the trial progressed, Melania's character shone through. She wasn't seeking revenge but justice, a justice that would set a precedent for others. Her story inspired many, with social media flooded with messages of support. Meanwhile, Donald Trump watched from the sidelines, his face a mix of pride and frustration. "She's stronger than anyone realizes," he murmured. As closing arguments began, the tension reached its peak. The defense attempted to discredit the evidence but faltered under scrutiny. The jury's expressions revealed growing conviction. The judge announced a recess before the verdict, leaving everyone on edge. Outside, the atmosphere was electric, with the world watching this monumental moment. Would justice prevail? The courtroom was silent as the jury returned, their expressions unreadable. Every eye was on them, and every heartbeat seemed to echo louder than the footsteps of the foreperson approaching the judge. Melania sat with a calm exterior, but those closest to her could see the subtle tension in her hands, resting firmly on the table. The judge addressed the court. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreperson nodded. "We have, Your Honor." The room seemed to shrink as the verdict was read aloud. On the count of assault and defamation against Mrs. Melania Trump, we find the defendant guilty. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Relief washed over Melania's face, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a small smile. Donald, sitting nearby, reached for her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. The defendant's face fell, his bravado crumbling as the weight of justice bore down on him. His lawyer whispered hurriedly, but it was clear, this was a fight they had lost. The judge delivered the sentence, a significant fine for damages, a public apology to Melania, and community service. "This court hopes you'll use this as an opportunity to reflect on your actions," the judge said sternly. Outside the courthouse, the media swarmed to capture the moment. Melania stepped forward, poised and elegant, to address the crowd. "Today is not just a victory for me," she began, her voice steady. "It is a message to every woman, every individual, that standing up against wrong is always worth it." Her words resonated across the country, sparking a wave of support and discussions about respect, accountability, and justice. Social media buzzed with hashtags honoring her courage, and her story inspired countless others to speak out against their own injustices. Weeks later, Melania reflected on the journey. It had been painful, exhausting, and deeply challenging, but it had also been transformative. In her heart, she knew she had not just won a case, she had won a battle for dignity and respect, paving the way for a better future. As the Trump family gathered at their Mar-a-Lago estate, laughter and joy filled the air. Melania felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing she had not just endured but triumphed. This was more than justice. It was redemption. Thank you for watching Elite Unfolded, where we unravel the untold and unfold the extraordinary. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more captivating tales. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, we'd love to hear from you.